Since I got you to bite on the last one, and you mentioned Kennedy's potential vulnerability to, well, you just got up there, let me ask you this. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not very, well, it wouldn't be much of a attack to use, and 10 being probably a pretty strong vulnerability to it, how would you rate two particular issues on incumbent Governor John Bel Edwards? Number one, his emphatic statement leading up to the election that he would not raise taxes, and number two, him having gone to the Louisiana State Supreme Court in an effort to say that transgendered folks should be able to use the restroom of their choice. Giving you one economic policy, one social policy.
So the question is assessing Governor Edwards' vulnerability on a 1 to 10 scale, with 10 being most vulnerable, on an economic issue, which would be the promise not to raise taxes, and the social issue, which would be about transgenders. I'll start with the social issue. I don't think that would be a very hot button issue. I'd give it a 3 to 5. It's the kind of issue that's salient to the contingent of religious conservatives, but not much beyond that. Plus, for it to be more towards a 5, you have to assume that litigation would be ongoing and making the paper every day, or alternatively, there being a lot of TV and mail communications on that issue. So that's the social issue. The economic issue, the way I would assess that is this. It's certainly a challenge for Governor Edwards on the taxing issue, because once you have that footage, it's very easy to use that over and over again in commercials. What has to happen, though, for him to be vulnerable on the tax issue, and again, I'll give him a 5 on this one, and I'll tell you why. So, a lot of the quote-unquote damage when you're talking about increased taxes occurred in 2015 and 2016. When you're talking about an election in 2019, the impact of that damage recedes further and further into the past. The thing which I think could trip him up would be, depending on what ultimately gets decided in the legislature in terms of new taxes that would get added on, that could be a vulnerability. But at the same time, he could also point out, given that the sales tax renewal is a very strong sticking point for the Legislative Black Caucus, Governor Edwards could just as easily say that he supported reducing taxes, i.e. the falling off of those temporary taxes from the rolls or the books. And if you want to really get partisan about it, he could also say that those taxes were Republicans' fault, and that, you know, now we have low unemployment and I'm taking those sales taxes off the books. So to me, for there to be a vulnerability, if, let's say, you had something like, say, a lot more things subject to the sales tax, and or say taking away the itemized deductions, or if we really want to get into the politically not going to happen, increasing the income tax. Those kinds of things, and I've actually done some polls on various kinds of taxes, their palatability and lack thereof. Income taxes are the absolute worst thing to try to get voters to agree to. If you're talking about the backdoor income tax increases, such as taking away exemptions and credits and all that, voters don't quite get as upset about that. So like I said, it all depends on what the ultimate strategy is as to what gets added to the tax burden, as opposed to talking about the taxes that are going to fall off.